this intellectual masochism, as I would call it, is exactly that. It's adopting the idea that you don't agree with in order to expand your intellectual domain. And greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I want to talk about intellectual masochism, and not just a way of deriving pleasure, just like any masochism is, but as a way of probably or possibly expanding like your domain, your intellectual domain, your scope of knowledge, I guess, your scope of ideas at the very least, alright? So let's talk about briefly what is masochism in general. And I've described it in quite a bit of detail. I think it was the video Bad Ending. I'm gonna link it just in case it was this video in the description, where we talked about that masochism is essentially what it is sustaining damage so that like by overcoming this damage, by kind of seeing that you can you're not dying because of this damage, roughly speaking. Therefore, you must be very powerful so you can sustain even this amount of damage. Like the bigger it is, the better, obviously. And therefore, this feeling that you have so much power brings you pleasure. This is masochism in a nutshell. And again, any pleasure to a degree is masochistic. It's just like, you know, like tastes differ. Like what kind of masochism you prefer, really. Like if you think about, again, an example I gave already in some of my previous videos, like spices that we add to our food, right? Spice is essentially a poison, right? It's something that plants specifically developed for you to not eat them, right? But you like eating it because it gives you this feeling of contradiction, this resistance, right? Don't eat me, like I'm poisonous. But you like it because you overcome this pleasure and, overcome this resistance and therefore derive pleasure from it because you feel that you have enough power to overcome it, etc., etc. So what am I talking about specifically here is intellectual variety of the same sort, of the same thing. So I'm talking about what I understand by intellectual masochism is essentially to deliberately pursue an idea that you initially do not agree with. It's as simple as that. So you sort of like go in the wrong direction to see if you can eventually still like steer it in a correct direction, you know, again, overcome this resistance of going in the wrong direction in the first place. So you can see the connection to the masochism as we just discussed, right? So to see if you can eventually still get to the destination, like whatever your destination is. I mean, supposedly it's some sort of fruitful, useful, or at least beautiful kind of idea, alright? So we're talking about some intellectual exercise, if you wish, alright? So pursue the wrong idea and see if you can actually make it work, you know, very broadly speaking. So yeah, we're talking about something like putting yourself in more trouble than you'd otherwise get if you follow the ideas that you initially agree with, or something to that effect. You know, like again, like Robert Fripp, that's a quote I've already gave sometime before, like when stuck, increase the complexity, right? So when you're at a loss, when you don't have useful ideas, you need to actually limit yourself, like make your own situation worse. And that would kind of stimulate your thinking. We would kind of like revitalize all of your internal powers, if you wish. I don't know, it sounds kind of pathetic what I'm talking about right now. But yeah, when stuck, increase the complexity, alright? Or this other example that I gave in my video, Onion of Aliens, I think it was part 3, where we talked about the intelligence, and how it arises, where I said that the most crucial part of intelligence is stopping and thinking, right? First you need to stop. And how can you get yourself to stop when you increase the complexity so much, as Fripp advises you, that you cannot move anymore, so you have to stop. And then you can think fruitfully, right? So yeah, or another quote that I somehow remembered randomly, like, if you find yourself like in a hole, the first thing to do is to stop digging, right? First thing to do is to stop digging. So stop moving. Then you can think, right? Otherwise you can dig yourself even deeper. That's what we're talking about. So yeah, so intellectual masochism is in a way, you know, kind of struggling, in words of George Carlin, your thinking, or like grape, you know, without the first letter, your own thinking. So in a way, it is a little bit of like a childish moment, you know, like you may approach it from this sort of side, as I actually did, I think. Like, if I'm trying to reflect upon, like, what I did, like, what I'm saying, essentially, I utilize this method of intellectual masochism quite a lot, and I still keep doing that sometimes. So, there is a bit of this childish, kind of behavior over here, right? Some sort of like a temper tantrum kind of thing, where you think this wrong idea almost out of spite, you know? Like, you know, to kind of emotionally damage your parents who you want something out of them, but they don't give it to you. So you start doing stupid stuff, right? This is what I'm talking about. The spirit of contradiction, this childish spirit of contradiction. But in this respect, when we're talking about like it as an intellectual exercise, right? You are your own parents. All these established dogmas that you already have, you as a sentient, rational being, right? These ideas, there's like a, you know, an array of ideas you agree with, right? So these ideas are kind of your intellectual parents, right? Not literally, not quite even metaphorically, but hopefully you can get what I'm saying, right? Like, this is something, it's your like cupola, it's the dome on top of you, right? Which kind of keeps you in some sort of controlled, livable environment intellectually, right? And if you're doing something out of spite towards it, you adopt this childlike temper tantrum, you're deliberately going outside, not being covered by this protective shell of your already established dogmas or ideas, right? But this is kind of how you discover something new, right? Isn't it? Like, you have to actually stray away from things you've already thought about or you already agree with. Like, if you just sit on those things for your whole life, you will never discover anything new, right? So in this respect, it's a very fruitful, actually, exercise, right? Of again, as I've said at the very beginning, of expanding your, I don't know, scope of ideas, you know, your domain, the mapping new stuff, right? Finding something new. Somehow it turns into some sort of a quote galore, this video, still. Frank Zappa, right? Mind is like a parachute. It doesn't work unless it's open. So again, you have to open the door and walk out of it, right? You have to chase the stupid idea, whether it's out of spite in this childish manner, or I'm not sure if spite is the correct word, actually, out of spirit of contradiction, let's put it this way, or just out of curiosity, honestly, right? Something like that. So you can see the connection to masochism in general, as I've described it at the very beginning, at the very least, where you, again, sustain colossal damage and still prevail and feel additional power because of it. Except here in intellectual domain, we can actually not just feel the power, but we can actually have the power. Meaning, you know, again, another quote, scientia potentia est, right? Francis Bacon. Science, or rather, knowledge is power. Not just science, any kind of knowledge. So you will acquire new knowledge if you pursue even the ideas you don't agree with. And this is kind of the magical part of this exercise, right? Like, you can use wrong tools to get correct results, to get the correct products, if you wish. Or, I mean, wrong, in air quotes, you know, tools that you think are wrong, basically, right? Or you have thought that are wrong. So, in a way, like a more toned down version of this masochistic approach would be playing devil's advocate, a pretty, you know, well-known, again, intellectual strategy, or like steel manning your opponent's arguments in a debate, for example, right? So steel manning, if you're not aware for some reason, is like an opposite of straw manning. So straw manning an opposing argument is to deliberately make it weak and then attack this weakened version of the argument. Steel manning is to deliberately making the argument of your opponent look as strong as possible, right? And then attacking this. So this is what I'm talking about, essentially, except here in intellectual masochism, you don't even perceive this argument as the argument of your opponent. You actually adopt it yourself, right? And like, be as genuine as possible in this respect. And you just go with it. You just say, okay, this is what we're dealing with right now, and this is how we're gonna do things. And then you see how far you can proceed with that. This is the intellectual masochism in a nutshell, all right? And it's so much fun, actually. I mean, obviously, again, returning to these toned down versions. In rhetoric, like, people are often asked to, let's say, defend an argument which they may not even agree with. But then again, here, I'm actually kind of, emphasize this moment that you have to adopt it as your own, right? In some sense. In a lot of senses, actually, okay? So, yeah. And like, speaking of, you know, hate, like, if you adopt an idea that you actually kind of actively hating, well, you know, you cannot really hate something which you don't intrinsically have in yourself, right? This is kind of again, a truism, a trivial point, but it's true. That's why it's so trivial, right? Like, you know, when I first read Nietzsche, I was so pissed off, actually, when I read Thus Spake Zarathustra. Like, the first, like, I don't know, 50 pages, I was furious. Like, I was very angry, and like, I was almost saying out loud, like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Like, I hate this guy, basically, but somewhere deep down, I knew that what this guy is saying is correct, and that's why I'm hating it so much. So I kept reading, you know. So this was also an occasion of intellectual masochism in a way, right? So there is this aspect of it as well. Like, if you hate some ideas, it just means that you probably have them, but you're like pushing them away for some reason. Again, maybe some external influence. Again, your parents or some thinkers or like public figures who convinced you, or like rather you're using their authority as a way of convincing yourself that these other ideas which you yourself have are not worthy, right? But you still have those ideas, and they're still like in you, and that they still bring you some sort of anxiety, not anxiety, like there is some internal pain, you know. You can't just get rid of them. So if you have this situation, then you can probably hate these ideas, but how about you just follow them and see where it goes, because they are part of you somehow. Like, some part of your personality wants to express itself through these ideas, and you're just not letting it to do it. But why? Maybe, you know, like, something good will come out of it, you know. We're delving somewhere into some sort of psychotherapy over here, and I don't really like it. So, but anyway, let's try to wrap up this small segment. So you can only hate something which you recognize within yourself, essentially. So it's like a tuning fork, you know, this other idea, which, like, you hit it, like, it rings, and something in you rings as well, and it brings this sort of internal turmoil in you, and that's why you hate it, right? Or rather, not that's why, but you may love it by the same token, but you may also hate it if, again, for some reason you're suppressing it inside of you, right? So, yeah. So, it would stir these emotions in you. So, because if you don't have it in you and somebody, like, hits this fork and it starts ringing, like, there would be no response within you, and, like, you would just say, well, okay, like, rationally, intellectually, I understand what you're saying, but, like, I have nothing to say about this. Like, I may agree, I may disagree, I may be indifferent to what you're saying, but I don't actively hate it or love it, you know? That's what I'm talking about. So, yeah. And let's actually conclude this rant. I think I've already said enough, okay? So, actually, like, one note before we conclude. if there is no truth, like think about it, there are no right or wrong ideas, and every idea could be utilized to some benefit. So in this sense, you may consider ideas almost like, I don't know, some sort of vehicles, like horses, for example, right? So one idea, if you adopt it, like you're sitting on this horse and it can get you to some places. But another idea, which would be another horse, can get you to some other places. And you would never know about these other places unless you sit on this horse of this other idea, right? So this intellectual exercise, this intellectual masochism, as I would call it, is exactly that. It's adopting the idea that you don't agree with in order to expand your intellectual domain and, again, get some like bigger and better, more diverse intellectual experience, essentially gain wisdom if you think about it, right? Yeah, that will be all probably. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing. If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.